Ever walk past a place for rent and wish you could just take a peek inside? Maybe even explore the layout. Envision the natural light streaming through the windows. Or plan where your vinyl record collection would go. At Apartments.com, you can. With tools like their 3D virtual tours, you can see the exact unit you could be living in. Really envision yourself in your new home with Apartments.com, the place to find a place.
You're listening to the Archaeology Podcast Network.
You have my sword.
And you have my bow.
And my trowel.
Hi, you're listening to episode 59 of And My Trowel, where we look at the fantastic side of archaeology and the archaeological side of fantasy. I'm Tilly.
And I'm Ash.
And I just realised this is the first episode of the new year. So, yeah.
Oh my God, yeah.
Happy New Year.
Happy New Year.
Happy New Year.
Happy New Year. Don't sing, Tilly, don't sing.
I'm not going to say, I was so tempted to sing Happy New Year by ABBA, but I'm not going to do it.
Just imagine it, listeners, in your mind.
Yeah, exactly.
Just Tilly
We
singing
can't
to
afford
you.
the copyright, yeah. So,
No.
But today, considering that before the break over New Year, we were talking about the archaeology of The Witcher, we decided to continue that theme, but slightly differently, because today we're going to be talking about the archaeology of Terry Pratchett's Discworld.
You finally got it in.
I finally got a whole double episode in. Yeah. So, yeah. So spoilers, as always, ahead then for anyone who is just diving into the Discworld series. There may be some spoilers. I'm not going to do like any major spoilers, I don't think, but I will let you know if I am. But yeah, just to let you know. So yeah, there you go. So I wanted to do a sort of quest entry and I was trying to think of a way to do it. So I wanted to say, cast your mind into the abyss of space. And before you see a massive turtle swimming through space, and on the back of the turtle are 4 elephants, and on the back of the 4 elephants is a disc, and on the disc is the Discworld. And that's how a lot of the books start as well, but a lot more verbose because Terry Pratchett's a lot better writer.
I thought it was very good, Tilly. I don't know.
Yeah.
I thought it was very good. Yeah.
I've read enough of them, I guess. But yeah, basically it's all the Discworld, for those who are unaware, is this world that floats on the back of a turtle. And the turtle's called Great Utwin. And and it's a series. I don't know. Have you read any? I mean, I know you've read Mort because we've read that for book club.
Yes. Yeah. So I read, well, they came out all on like, it was either BBC or Sky or something at Christmas.
Oh, the TV series.
Yeah, they did whole adaptations around it. So when I was like in a late teen, mid-teen maybe, I got Making Money and like the Going Postal and Making Money but I barely can remember him. I just remember he's wears a gold suit.
Yeah. Moist von Lipwig is his name.
That's his name. Yeah. So I read I read Making Money. I didn't read Going Postal.
Oh, interesting.
Because I'd like seen the adaptation. I thought, I don't know. I'd like the characters. So I was like, I'll see what. And I remember reading it and going, this is fun. Yeah. But I haven't, apart from Mort. And you've given me Weird Sisters, which I need to read as well.
Yes.
So I'm fairly a newbie to Discworld. I knew about the turtle because I've seen the adaptations.
Yes.
And like, I think you kind of can't go anywhere without bumping into Terry Pratchett in some way.
Yeah, you hang out with me a lot. I mean.
Yeah. Yeah, that's a hazard of being your friend.
Well, it's funny. I did read when I was really young. I read The We Free Men, which is like the first of the children's series, which is the Tiffany Aching series. And she's basically, in the first book, The We Free Men, she's like an 11-year-old witch. So it's sort of aimed at, like older children, young teenagers kind of thing.
Right, okay.
And then, but they were published over a long period of time. So actually they get a lot darker as the year, they sort of only were published every couple of years, basically. Because he would publish a book every year or two, I think. But the whole Discworld series has like sub-series within it. So even though you have like characters from certain books coming into other books and everything, the focus will be on a particular one. So like you just mentioned Going Postal, which is all about Moist von Lipwig, who's like a con man who in Going Postal ends up having to accidentally run the Ankh-Morpork Postal Service, which is like the biggest city on the disc. And then, in the second one, he becomes a bank manager. And then there's actually a third one called Raising Steam, where it's all about the start of the railway. And so that's like
interesting.
So
okay.
But
I'll have to read the first and the third.
Yeah, you should. They're good. But like, so those ones all center really around like Moise von Lipwig. But like, there's a lot of characters that pop up from other ones. So there'll be like the newspaper is a massive thing in Going Postal because it's all about like him pandering to the news and everything. And there's a whole book called The Truth, which is my favorite one, which is all about the start of the newspaper. So that's where you meet those characters, and then they like pop into all the other ones. So it's sort of, if you haven't read them all, it doesn't really matter. But like if you have, then it's sort of fun because you see references to things happening like throughout.
So can you read them as standalones or like series, or do you have to read them in a particular order? Because I know that we've had that kind of question a lot in our book club when we were reading Maud. Where do I read from the beginning of to know the characters? So do you recommend reading them in series, or do you start at the very first one that he wrote, or is there a certain order that you have to read them?
This is a really funny thing actually that comes up a lot with Discworld fans, because the very first one, Colour of Magic, is very different in like style and vibe to a lot of the later ones, which are kind of what I would say quintessentially like Pratchett. The first one is very much like an 80s comic fantasy book. Like, if that makes sense, like sort of a lot of stereotypes that are completely made fun of, and just really kind of silly humor and everything. And I mean, there's silly humor through all of them, but like it's magic and wizards and dragons and everything, which are in the later books. But I would say the later books are more about the like everyday happenings, and then they just happen to be set in this fantasy world. Whereas the first few are more about the fantasy, if that makes sense. But because of that, a lot of people don't recommend starting with the Colour of Magic because it's a bit more specific taste, shall we say. And I don't think that one is as similar to ones that come later. So a lot of people actually recommend starting somewhere in the middle, because that's more when Terry Pratchett's like really got into his stride with the Discworld. And so you can really get an idea of the characters and everything. But indeed, there's these little sub-series, and I would recommend starting at the beginning of one of the sub-series. So like the one I sent you, Weird Sisters, is the first one in the Witches sub-series. And there's like 4 or 5 books in the Witches sub-series, but they're spread over, they're like book 6, 12, 15, and 18, or, they're sort of...
Oh, wow. Okay.
Yeah. So there's other things that happen in between all the stories. And you don't have to. You can read them all as standalone novels, but you do see character development, and you do see like... Yeah, you do get a bit of context for certain things, I guess, if you read them in order. So, yeah, I don't know if that answered the question.
No, it did. I mean, it sounds fairly intimidating, not gonna lie. Like, the idea of starting in the middle. But then it's interesting that, the first books that he wrote, are where you think the world building would be. Yeah. Like, typically, most fantasies start, like,
Yeah, it is, but I think it's... I don't know. I can't explain it very well, but it's
great that we're doing a podcast episode on them. Yeah.
Let's put it this way. I haven't read The Colour of Magic or The Light Fantastic, which are the first two, more than once. Like, I've read them.
I thought you were just going to say you hadn't read them, and I was going to be like, boo, Tilly, boo, shame. Like,
but I also actually started with fan. Also, I started with the We Free Men, but actually my first like grown-up one was Going Postal as well, funnily enough, that I got for my birthday or something. And so then I was like, this is a cool series. Let's start from the beginning. And I read it, I think, when I was like 13. So I did, I was sort of the right age, I guess. I was really into fantasy and all this kind of thing. So it was sort of the right entry point for me, I think. And then I read them all in order. But yeah, I've never gone back and reread The Light Fantastic or The Colour of Magic, but I have reread a lot of the others many times. So I don't know if that kind of...
So does The Colour of Magic not feel like a Pratchett book to you?
Yeah, not so much. It's like it's definitely, you can tell it's an earlier version, And I think the majority of the time, Pratchett fans don't want to recommend that one because we're worried that people will be like, oh, really? This amazing thing that you've been going on about? It's like, well, yes, it is, but it gets better. Like, it gets so much better. So that's why we're always like, start in the middle. And then there's so many different ones. So like The Weird Sisters is about witches. So it's about kind of rural life with these like crotchety old women. And then Mort is about death. So that's the one we read in the book club. And so that's a bit more kind of fantastical but sort of almost supernaturally way. And then you have the wizards ones, which is like bumbling university folk. And so there's like a couple of, and then my favorite ones are the Industrial Revolution series, which is The Truth, which is about the start of the newspaper. And then you have like Moving Pictures, which is the start of the cinema, and yeah, all these sorts of things. So there's a couple of, and the Going Postal ones I really like as well. And the Watch ones. The Watch ones are the best ones.
So all of them.
I mean, they're all pretty good.
Just I recommend all, apart from The Colour of Magic. So but I'm confused. So I remember when I was reading Making Money, and that the world was like an 18th century world. It wasn't a typical, like in fantasy, especially high fantasy, you tend to have like medieval traditional settings. Like Witcher, when we talk about Witcher, that's medieval. So what makes Pratchett different? Obviously, you go into a different era with the Industrial Revolution, but is the Colour of Magic set in the medieval period? Does he go through that, or is there not like time periods within the world itself?
You do, it's sort of actually, now I'm thinking about it, I think that is more, because like I say, it's more classic fantasy, so I guess it is slightly more medieval-esque. Like you have you have Conan the Barbarian. No. What's the real one called?
I was like, what? The Conan the Barbarian, yeah.
It's Conan the Barbarian, so it's
one?
Cohen the Barbarian. Who's this like
is he
old
not
man.
a barbarian? I feel
he's
okay,
like 102 and he's like retired, but he's still this like ancient barbarian. And you know, you have like that kind of world, but you have a lot of, it's such deep history, but I think that's what's also really interesting about it is it's not so much focused on the world building. It's almost focused on a satire of the world, but it's a satire of issues in the modern world. So it's set in this kind of older time, but you do have all these little things that pop up. So you have these things called Disorganizer, which is like the Gooseberry 5000 or something. That's this little imp.
Like the blueberry.
Yeah, like a blackberry, you know. And so,
a blackberry, blueberry. What the hell am I talking about? Oh, sorry, that's the other knockoff Pratchett book that I've read. Sorry. I do like blueberries.
So you have kind of, it is focused on the world building, and you have so much, and we're going to talk a bit about that, I think, in the rest of this episode. This has just been more kind of introducing the series, and I realize I've already gone off on tangents, so I apologize to people listening in and are like, when's the archaeology coming? It is coming, I swear. But,
we're an archaeology podcast. Oh.
Yeah. No, we're turning into a Terry Pratchett Discworld.
Yeah, apparently. I'm now in the fan club.
But it's sort of,
which I wouldn't mind.
It's more about like the character's development and different issues that happen. So like there's one that's about war, and a lot of the characters have kind of issues with anger management of kind of at the injustice of the world, but then trying to sort of find their place in it. And then like there's a lot of really complex themes, but they're dealt with in a very satirical way. So I think that's more the focus of it rather than like a particular time period. But that's what I find really fascinating about it when trying to look at it from an archaeological perspective, because you almost don't look at it in terms of the context of a time period, because it's sort of almost like an alternate universe. It's almost a bit steampunky, I think, but it's
I can
not.
See that.
Yeah, it's sort of interesting because they have like in the Watch books, for example, they're all wearing armor and they have swords, you know, and all this kind of thing. But in one of them, there's a new kind of technology called the gun. And, you know, obviously it's a gun, but like it's this really dangerous thing. And they have this whole metaphor within it about like, do guns kill people or do people kill people? Which I won't go into too much because it's a bit of a spoiler. But like, yeah, so there's a lot of references to modern things as well. But there's also like a lot of setting in terms of, I wouldn't even say 18th century. I'd say maybe like, it's sort of a weird mix of like medieval and 18th century.
Yeah, that's what I've always got with it. It's sort of the mix of the new and the old. Yeah. Like working together in tandem a lot of the time. Yeah. Like to have wizards and like guilds, but then also have a bank in that kind of like almost neoclassical. Yeah, it's strange, but cool at the same time. And have mythical figures walking around the place like death and
we have death, and you do have like witches and wizards and you know all this sort of stuff. But then you also have like a really complex political structure. It's not that complex. You have Lord Vetinari, who what's the quote? Is something like, the theme was one man, one vote. Lord Vetinari was the man and he had the vote. And so he's the tyrant basically of the city. But he's like a very complex politician as well. So like he's a tyrant, but he's also like pulling the strings of everyone and it runs really smoothly because of him. So it's sort of, there's a lot of complexity from different time. And I think there's a lot of references to different time periods coming out as well. Like in some of them, there's a lot more. There's one called The Pyramids, which is about ancient Egypt. Very much so. Like it's called, it's funny. It's one of those things spelt out. Oh, how is it spelt out again? It's spelt DJELIBEBE. And when you're just reading it, you're like, yeah, cool. And if you have to say it out loud, it says Jelly Baby.
Yeah, I was just writing that out, and I was like, "That's Jelly Baby."
So the chunk country of Jelly Baby, but you know that's like. So
you just know he was like sitting there chewing on a sweet, and was like, "What can I call this?" And looks down the packet, and he's like, "Round trips Jelly Babies."
So like that one's definitely set in ancient Egypt. So you have it's all about the pyramids, and it's about the gods, and then you've got Small Gods, which is very clearly set. It's called Omnia, but you can tell he's got a lot of inspiration from like the ancient Mesopotamia sort of period and all this kind of thing. So there's a lot of different references to different time periods within each one, but it's all kind of a mishmash in a way.
So did a quick question before we break, but like, did Terry Pratchett have a history background? What was his before writing?
No, he was a journalist. So he worked for a newspaper, and he worked for a newspaper from a very young age. I can't remember off the top of my head when it was, but he started writing from quite young. And then I can't remember if he left school early, because you could back in those days, you left when you were like 15. Well, I mean, you still can, I think. And then started working for a newspaper and basically worked his way up, and then started writing sort of short stories and things for different papers, different anthologies, these kind of old, fantasy anthologies that they used to have, like the kind of magazines that came out all the time, and they'd have short stories. So he started writing those, and then at some point he wrote, and it's interesting actually, they've released since his death in 2016, they released a couple of things called, what they called, like a scratch of the pen or something. I can't remember now what it's called. I'll put them in the show notes. So
I know which one you mean.
Like a type of the keyboard, a scratch of the pen or something of the screen. And they're basically little short stories that he wrote when, like, before things. And you can kind of see a little bit of some of the sort of first seeds that turn into Discworld, like emerging, which is quite interesting. But yeah, he didn't have a history background, but he was... Obviously I'm biased, but I just feel like he was a very curious person. So he got really deep into a lot of the stuff, I think, that he was researching, because you can see that in like really bizarre little references to something that you're like, heh, like,
wait a second, how do you know that?
How did you know about that? Yeah, exactly. So he strikes me as a sort of person who just sort of really niggles away at something and does like a full rabbit hole on, any sort of topic that he's
I'm like in awe of him, because if I did that, I would just get stuck on the research and never write a book in my life.
Yeah,
exactly. He wrote like dozens, in the tens.
But like in one of them, he said, so one of them's called Small Gods, which is about the great god Om, who's like one of the only monotheic gods in Discworld, which we'll probably talk about again in a bit. And he basically wants to come back to Earth to, smite down the humans and show his great power. But he doesn't realize that actually the majority of Omnians don't actually believe in him anymore. They're just sort of going through the motions. So when he comes back, his power, which is affected by the amount of belief that's around, is so little that he comes back as a tortoise rather than like a big eagle or like a lightning bull or, all these old things that he used to do. And he gets introduced by being picked up by one of those vultures that, pick up turtles and then drop them on the rocks.
Oh, God.
And eat them. And so that's how he's introduced, but then he lands on this boy and then they go off on adventure together. But like apparently that whole story came about because Terry Pratchett happened to see a nature documentary about vultures like dropping tortoises on a rock, and from that a whole novel about, which is like a super complex satire and critique of religious systems and everything came about, which is like, wow, okay.
Like, what if that was a god? That's very cool. Yeah. Oh, I just saw a bright flash of light and I heard a scream of pain from the outside of the window.
Oh, that's probably Otto Schreck. He's a vampire, but he works as a photographer for the Times newspaper. But that means that he dissolves into a pile of dust every time he uses the flash on his camera. Hang on, let me just go outside and resuscitate. Okay, Otto is up and back on his way again.
Do you know, it's funny, right? Imagine if we just hadn't seen that and like hadn't gone outside. And when we went outside, we would have seen a pile of dust and a camera.
Right? Although actually he does have a few kind of hints that point to his position as a black ribboner, and obviously you have the words written in Uberwaldian on like his paper. So
Hang on, tell you, be kind to me. What's Uberwaldian?
Right.
You need to explain this a little bit more about the landscape of Discworld, I feel.
Yes. Right. Okay. Let's go a bit more into the world building of this. So indeed. So as I mentioned, there's like, it's a flat earth, or well, basically, which is kind of funny because there's also a comment at some point from Lord Veterinary, which is like, oh, back in the day, we thought the earth was flat. Then we knew the earth was round. Now we know it is flat and lies on the back of a turtle that swims through the air. Don't you wonder what shape it's going to be tomorrow? Like kind of thing, which I thought, but yeah. That sort of also, that reference to people working out whether the disc is flat or not. And that's obviously a reference to all these ancient, cartographers who were trying to work out the sort of circumference of the world and everything. But there's all these different countries. So you have like Uberwald, which is basically kind of Eastern Europe. In a way, so everyone speaks with an accent like this, and and that's where all like the vampires and the werewolves and the kind of dark, things, dark woods and forests and everything are. And then you have Klatch, which is kind of Arabian Peninsula-esque. So you have a lot of desert, and then you have like all these really complex tribal systems as well. And then, you've got, I can't go into all the detail because there's so many different ones and they're all covered in detail. Those are kind of the main two in the ones that sort of I have read, I guess. And Lanka, which is where the witches are, which is, I guess, Middle Europe in a way, or sort of, actually, no, that's probably that one's more like the UK, I would say. That's sort of the most UK version. And then you have the Chalk, which is like Southeast England. So it's all about chalk cliffs and flint, that makes sense. Things, which that one's really interesting because they talk about flint a lot, and that them being, the souls of ancient creatures, and that's what gives it its heart. And there's a lot about standing stones. So in Lanka and in the Chalk, that's the one with the witches, you have a lot of reference to kind of ancient mounds and ancient statues and sort of these monolithic structures and all of this kind of thing, which I find quite interesting as well. But yeah, so you have a lot of geography, shall we say, a lot of different kinds of geography around.
But they're like real world counterparts almost.
Yeah, you can sort of see the inspiration, let's put it that way.
That's cool. Yeah. So does he go into like the archaeology of these worlds?
A little bit, yeah. So we've actually spoken about it a little bit on the very first episode of this podcast. If you cast your mind back,
back, guys.
58 episodes to the one about the golems and the agency of the golems.
Oh, yeah.
Because the golems are, and actually they turn up in Going Postal. There's one.
Yes, they do. Yeah, I know that one.
And there's one called Anghamarad, who is 3,000 years old, and they're basically the like postmen are trying to say like, but why should these golems become postmen? Like, oh no, they're not even real. And and it's like, what did you even do? And he's like, I was a messenger for the kings of the ancient empires and like all this sort of thing. And they're going, oh really? You're going to tell him if he can be a postman? Like he's the original postman. And so they sort of go into a lot of about that sort of deep history, and they're buried. They even go into stratigraphy a little bit, because the Spike, whose real name is Adorabelle Deerheart, who's one of my favorite characters of the Discworld,
right. Yeah.
I think is basically an archaeologist. She is head of the Golem Trust, so she goes out and she finds golems that have accidentally gotten kind of buried and then forgotten about, because a golem will obey orders, but if it's not given any orders, it'll just kind of sit there. So if it's thousands of years old and it's just kind of sitting there, obviously it gets covered, right, by stratigraphic layers in the soil. And so there's a bit of reference to that, because it's like, oh wow, they were 2 kilometers deep, and it's like, what? Like that's ridiculously old. Like how could they be that old? And it turns out they're a bit heavier. And anyway, but yeah, she talks a lot about going on excavations, and she goes on field work and that kind of thing, which is quite funny. So there is reference to that. And then of course you have in pyramids, when it's talking about the ancient Egyptian sort of jelly baby, then you've got all the pyramids, and you even have, like, spoiler alert, at some point you have all the old kings kind of coming back to life from where they've been entombed in the pyramids. And
that sounds like terrifying or fun. I can't decide.
And like even in the city, You have a lot of reference to kind of just talking about stratigraphy again. There's a lot of reference to like Ankh-Morpork was built on Ankh-Morpork. So if you actually go into the cellars of Ankh-Morpork, quite often they used to be like the top rooms of old houses. So you can find all these old road systems and everything underneath the streets of Ankh-Morpork because...
How Edinburgh.
Right? Well, I think that's where that got... Yeah, that's probably where the inspiration for that came from. So there's a lot of references to different parts of history. But what's really fascinating is because, as I sort of mentioned a bit in the last section, it's not really a clear time setting. It changes depending on which book you're reading. And that also affects then the sort of history that's being shown and how much of it. So usually in the ones, for example, set in Jelly Baby and set in Omnia, so the kind of ancient Mesopotamia-esque one, there's a real focus on the history of it. And in Lanka and the Chalk, it's also about like belonging to the land and the history of the land and all these sacred spots in the landscape kind of thing. So yeah, that is there, but then in some of the other ones, it's not quite as focused on, I guess.
Do you think it's just like the story that propels that rather than anything else?
I think so, probably. But like you can tell there's sort of all these little references to, so for example, what I just mentioned with Otto Schlick and the black ribbon is basically this pledge. The black ribbon is a pledge from vampires who at some point worked out that in order to fit into modern society, they have to stop drinking people's blood. So the black ribbon is a pledge to not drink blood, human blood. So if you're a black ribboner, you are, allegedly sort of safe kind of thing. And they have all these meetings. They have, what is it that they drink actually? I think they do have like animal blood and things as well. But I think they just kind of, all these substitutes that they come up with.
The vegans.
but they have like meetings, regular Black Ribboner meetings where they all get together and have a sing-song around the piano and stuff. And so it's all very like, but that they sort of, when they're describing that in the various books, because it comes up a few times, they always talk about like the history of how vampires have interacted in society. But that's not so much archaeology, that's more history, I guess, because it's quite a recent development.
Ethnography.
Ethnography. Yeah, exactly. Yeah. Talking about all these things.
So do you think there's like theory in it? Because I remember when we were reading Mort on our book club, the Archeo book club, if you want to join it on Discord, just letting his. In Mort, I remember you talking about how there's this kind of like almost an example of processual and post-processual archaeology in it.
Yeah. Which, oh gosh, what was that part? What was I talking about with that? I can't even remember it anymore. Obviously, as we talked about with the Golem one, there was the kind of object agency aspect, which is very post-processualist, that kind of things have all this special significance. And I think that's definitely shown through a lot of the books. You always have these particular objects or particular processes. It definitely does show like the whole concept of entanglement, from Ian Hodder, which for those those who are unaware of entanglement, it's basically the idea that like people rely on objects, rely on people, objects rely on object, like everything is completely entangled. I think, by the way, my favorite thing, I've recently reread his like papers on that because I was teaching it for one of my classes, and he always uses the word thing. He's like, because things and people, and I love that in an academic article you can use the word thing as like an official terminology.
The thing has meaning. Well, that's true. It does have meaning, thing.
Yeah, right? It does.
Yeah. But with Mort, you were talking about basically, because the whole like thing of Mort, and it's probably a spoiler, but the theme is it fate or can you change fate? So like you suggested that processional theory suggests that human history and social development is influenced by external forces in that kind of interconnected system. Yeah. But then post-processional theory claims that it's just messy.
Yeah.
And so human agency and internal decisions, they just influence whatever happens in society.
Yes.
So it was kind of coming out in Mort as well, as he was deciding lots of different stuff and things were changing, and he was getting to grips with becoming death, essentially.
Yeah. And there was a whole conversation with death. I mean, so spoiler alert for Mort. If you want to read Mort, go ahead a few minutes. Because, there was the whole conversation with death at the end, right? Where death basically kind of agreed to change history for them, right? To change fate, because it's like, well, no, it's not. It is messy. And actually there's a lot of that with death. There's a lot of those more philosophical, theoretical concepts. And I mean, it's not necessarily obviously, you know, he doesn't talk about post-processual archaeology,
No.
but if we're looking at it from an archaeological theoretical perspective, I would definitely say that a lot of the themes that are discussed in it and a lot of the kind of representations of the world are definitely more based in a post-processual framework. Let's put it that way, I think. Because, especially the ones with death, because it gets very philosophical very quickly, and there's a lot of discussion about like what is human nature and how have people become who they have and how has society developed to the stage that it has. So there's definitely a lot of that discussed in it. I guess it's all done very sort of metaphorically, which is probably the best way to do it, right? Because then that's a nice way to show the understanding of it. So yeah.
Yeah, but you also can't do it literally in like, you know, fiction necessarily.
Yeah.
You know?
Yeah.
But so the world, there is obviously special places that show the history of our world that has influenced Terry Pratchett's world.
Yeah.
But are there different peoples as well? You've talked a little bit about vampires and like, you know, golems and things like that. But how do they live alongside each other? Do they interact with each other's cultures? Like, what's going on there?
Right. Yeah. So you have, most of the stories are focused on humans. There's one towards the end, The Unseen Academicals, which is about a football club, weirdly enough. But it also is like this whole, philosophical story about like, what is evil? Which is like, because the main character, one of the main characters is a goblin.
Cool.
Who, and that's a whole, oh God. So this is why, so I know we joke about it on this podcast, on other podcasts that I've been on, about how, you know, that I always bring up Terry Pratchett. But for example, like the concept of a goblin is then supposed to be this kind of minority group who it's very focused on the history of colonialism and slavery and everything. And they're not slaves, and it's nothing majorly alluded to, but then they're talking about how their material culture, the material culture of goblins, and how goblin society has developed in the way it has because of this history of oppression and because of this history of being constantly marginalized and everything. And so it like, which is just, it sounds so, you know, you're like, oh yeah, that's a cool world building concept, like on the surface. But then if you really think about it, it's like, oh my gosh, like, yeah. And this is how archaeologically as well, if you look at how a material culture develops of a particular society, that can tell you so much about what they've been through and what their, you know, how their interactions are. Anyway, sorry, that's a complete side note. So,
well, no, that's right. I mean, you get to find out close connections with material culture, where things have come from, interaction, trade networks, like, you know, understand people more, I think.
Yeah.
Or goblins.
Exactly. The goblins. And so that's, if you want to read, I think it's Snuff, which is one of the later The Watch books, because Vimes, who is the main character of that one, becomes a commander and he then becomes a lord by accident. And sort of all this stuff happens.
Terrible.
But he's, you know, a good old salty soldier at heart. And anyway. So you have goblins. And so the main ones are humans, but then you do also have the other two sort of primary species, I would say, that are more constantly interacted with are dwarves and trolls, who also have their own history. And also that is referenced a lot in a couple of the books, where they have a very combative history, combative history, I don't know how to say it.
Yeah.
So which sort of also stems from very early mythology and legends about Tak, who is the dwarvish god, and how he interacted with the earliest dwarves and how he created the earliest trolls and all this kind of stuff. And that also comes to a head in one of the books where they discuss those sorts of things. So they always kind of, but again, for example, trolls, because their brains are made of silicon, that means that they...
Why are their brains made of silicon?
Yeah, because they're made of rock. The trolls are made of rock. And
right, sorry. Okay, that makes so much more sense. I'm thinking like troll under the bridge, not made of rock.
Yeah, so the trolls are made of rocks, and they come, so they originally come from like the high mountains and stuff where it's very cold. So when they come down to the plains and come into the cities, their brains can't work at a high enough level because it's too warm for them, because it's not the perfect environmental conditions. So then they're really dumb, basically. And there's like one scene where Detritus, who's the sort of dumbest troll who's on the watch.
Detritus?
Yeah, I know. His name's Detritus. And it's great. he accidentally gets stuck. And see, this is what I mean. This is one of those things where the first time you meet, you're like, Detritus. But now he's just such a familiar name that I'm like, yeah, Sergeant Detritus. Who else?
Yeah, it's funny.
But he accidentally gets stuck in an ice house at some point and then like completely solves all of the world's problems because his brain's finally working like a normal thing. So it sort of also
That's like
shows...
me when I get a hyper focus. I'm like,
right?
oh my God, yeah, I've had caffeine today. Brilliant.
But yeah, so that also kind of shows, I guess, how entwined with the landscape the different cultural development has happened and everything. And also the way that the societies work. So for example, with trolls, every so often you'll get a troll who is diamond. And so he automatically becomes the king of the trolls and there's no way that anyone could say anything against him because he's diamond, like he's clearly diamond. So he's clearly the king.
But I have a question. So wait, you said the dwarves make trolls.
No, the dwarvish god Tuck
made the dwarvish god made the trolls. Okay. So how did trolls have children?
Yeah. So they have... That's also really fascinating, actually. The trolls' view of history and the past is that we are walking backwards through time. And so that's why we can see the past, but we can't see the future because we're going backwards.
Trippy.
Right? And that's actually interesting with dwarves as well, because they are short because they, adapted to living in mines and working in all these things underground. And for them, therefore, the deeper you are, the higher status you are. So actually all of the language associated with that is different. So instead of being like, he's really on top of his game, you'd say like he's really at the bottom of his game, and like all this sort of thing. So, and with trolls, it's like, he's really a backwards thinker, means he's actually a real forward thinker, which is, quite interesting.
Cool, because that's bringing language into it. And
And I mean, gosh, we haven't even gone into like gods and religion and everything, but basically, I mean, we sort of briefly mentioned death. And
we've mentioned a few gods, actually. We've mentioned Tak. We've mentioned what was the god who turns into a tortoise? Yeah. We mentioned Ob as well. So we know that the gods exist in this.
There are gods, yeah. And there's like the whole pantheon of gods as well. And they do exist. That's the thing. So
they walk around as tortoises.
They don't walk around. They all live like the god palace, which I can't remember off the top of my head what it's called now. But it's basically like ancient Greek mythology.
Okay, so they live on a mountain or no?
Yeah, Cori Celesti, which is in the middle of the disc. And it's like the highest peak. And so, but then they like play games with the fates of man, but they don't actually come down and interact with them, apart from occasionally
typical gods.
Yeah, exactly. So, yeah. Oh,
apart from Om, yeah.
What's all that commotion outside?
There appears to be an orangutan trying to tear the arms of a man who's screaming, ape?
Ah, right. Yeah, that sounds like the librarian from the university. He gets a bit tetchy whenever someone calls him a monkey.
Do you want to go watch it?
Actually, yeah, I do. Okay, that's about it for this episode of Am I Trowel. We hope you enjoyed this quest. As always, please do like, subscribe, follow us wherever you get your podcasts. It really helps support the show. If you're interested in hearing more archaeology content, check out the other shows on the Archaeology Podcast Network. You'll find all contact info plus links and further reading on today's discussion in the show notes.
Thanks for listening to this podcast. The Archaeology Podcast Network's chief editor is Rachel Roden. Our executive producer is Ashley Airy. Our social media and newsletter coordinator is Matilda Siebrecht. The APN was founded by Chris Webster and Tristan Boyle on December 1st, 2014. We're supported by our amazing podcast hosts, many volunteers, and listeners like you. Check out membership at www.archpodnet.com/members.
This has been a presentation of the Archaeology Podcast Network. Visit us on the web for show notes and other podcasts at www.archpodnet.com. Contact us at chris@archaeologypodcastnetwork.com.